There's been 3D Flappy Bird, first-person Flappy Bird, and even second-person Flappy Bird. But now it's time for first-person shooter Flappy Bird. If you've been here a while, I've spoken about Flappy Bird a few times, but who would have thought that after a decade, it would still be relevant? I can vividly remember taking this screenshot back in 2014 of my high score and feeling like I was at the top of the world. But now, it's time to make my own janky version. So without further ado, let's give this little bird a gun. We'll start our project off with Unreal Engine's FPS template. We'll first need to change the movement component slightly though. We can get rid of any forward and horizontal movement and only keep the jump and mouse movement functionality, which will give us this. The issue is that Unreal's jump function only allows you to jump whenever you're on the floor, so we can create our own jump function by using the add impulse node. We only want our character to jump upward, so we can use the get up vector node and multiply that by some value to get the intended result. And if we try that, it doesn't work. This is most likely because we didn't set our jump force high enough. I usually underestimate the value needed in Unreal. But now it's working. Except there's a small issue. You might notice that the jumps are really inconsistent. Some of them are higher than the others, and that's because there's some downward velocity on some that's limiting the jumps. So before we call our jump function, we can reset the velocity on the actor so that our jumps will remain consistent. And just like that, we have our character's movement pretty much settled. We can obviously tweak its values in the future, but I want to get the basic gameplay finished before I do any of that. Next up, we'll want to have pipes that we can move through that will infinitely spawn in. In our event tick, we can subtract some value from the X position that'll make it move towards the character. And with that, we get that. This is most likely happening since I'm forcefully moving the pipe's position, and the physics simulation isn't very happy with that. So some things that I want to do is add some physics constraints to the player, but I also want to make sure the pipes stop moving once it collides with the player, but I'll leave that part for a little later. For now, I want to make sure these pipes spawn in on a timer, so we can create a pipe manager blueprint which will spawn them in at a certain interval. Now this is looking good so far, but we want to have some variability in each pipe's height, so we can give it a random Z value on spawn. And that didn't work. Alright, so I realized that I wasn't actually setting it to a random number, but I got that all sorted out, and I also went ahead and added a way for pipes to despawn after it's past the character. And it looks like everything's working perfectly. Now before I get started on the FPS stuff, I want to make sure that this part of the game is actually playable, so I'll tweak a bunch of values to make things work well. Obviously, a first-person version of Flappy Bird will feel a little different than the original side-scroller, but hopefully it'll feel as close as possible. Most of what I'm trying to tweak is how high the player will jump and the distance between each pipe. I also want to make sure that the player will be able to go from the highest possible pipe spawn to the lowest so that there isn't any impossible movements in the game. Alright, I think I'm at a point where the game is actually playable, but as I'm testing, I'm not absolutely certain that the game is actually hard, or if I'm just good at it. But that's not too big of a worry because eventually we'll have to jump and shoot at objects, so that'll make it harder anyways. For now though, we can get started on the FPS side of the game. The first thing we want to do is give our player a weapon, and since I don't want to use Unreal's template weapon, I'm going to bring one in from the Unreal Engine marketplace. We can start off by removing the arms and change the position of the camera, then we can just bring the pistol in, and now we have this. We can give our pistol the ability to shoot by creating a raycast that'll go out from the center of the screen. With that, we can check if any objects are intersecting with the raycast, and then we can have some functionality based on that. To make sure I know where I'm going to be aiming, I'm going to create a simple crosshair. With that, we can start working on the raycast functionality. All we need to do is start the raycast from our camera's location. Then for the impact location, we can get our camera's forward vector and multiply it for a certain distance. Then we can add that value to our camera's location to make it shoot out from wherever our camera is located. I'm shooting aimlessly for now, but it looks like the raycast is working. And although there's no targets, it already feels pretty difficult both jumping and shooting. But like I mentioned, we don't have anything to shoot at, and you've probably been wondering how I'd even turn Flappy Bird into a first-person shooter. The way I'm going to be approaching it is that I'll spawn an object between the gaps of the pipes, and you'll need to shoot it before you pass through it. If you don't, you'll lose. But before I implement that, I've been delaying creating the death functionality, so let's get that part over with. There's a few things I'll need to do once the player actually dies. I'll need to stop the player from being able to jump and shoot. Then I'll need to make sure the pipes stop moving and also don't spawn anymore. With that finished, I can start working on the target that'll be spawned between the pipes. To do this, when each pipe is spawned, I'll also be spawning in a target actor. I'll then check in the raycast if I've shot the target, and if I have, I'll destroy it. And with that implemented, it's working pretty well. But I'll also need to make sure that if the player collides with the target, they'll die. Now that I'm playing it though, shooting the target feels super easy. So some changes that I'll make is I'll make the target smaller, and instead of the target just staying still, I want to have it move up and down. The way I'll be doing this is by creating a timeline, which will just go back and forth between two values in a loop. I haven't used a timeline in a bit though, so I forgot how they worked, but I got something that I think looks good. It's not insanely hard, but I feel like the combination of jumping and the shooting makes it balanced. Now that I've pretty much gotten the main gameplay finished, we can start working on making the game look good. The first thing I'll work on is creating a 3D model for the pipes. Thankfully, the assets for this game aren't going to be insanely difficult. The pipes will just be a cylinder with the top being extruded out a bit. Next up, we'll need to come up with a model for the target. This one also should be easy. It'll just be a flattened cylinder, but I'll make a nice little target texture to make it stand out. And if we toss those into the game with some materials, it's looking a little more interesting. In the original Flappy Bird, there's some buildings in the background, so I'll model some buildings in Blender, and then I'll create a blueprint which will respawn the building so that it gives off the impression that it's an infinite world. With all that sorted out, I think the game is looking pretty nice, but I think I can make some post-processing changes and even some lighting changes to make it look a little bit more colorful. Now the debug line that I'm shooting at right now doesn't look very good, so we can get rid of that and add some particle effects. The pistol from the pack that I downloaded comes with a pre-made shooting animation which has a muzzle flash and a fire sound, so we just need to play this animation whenever we shoot. Then we can add a particle effect for the target destruction. Now we still don't have a way to track the score, so let's work on that now. In Flappy Bird, you need to pass through the pipe successfully in order to gain a point, but in this, since you have to shoot the targets, I feel like we should base the score on that. Every time you successfully shoot a target, you gain a point, but I wanted a way to penalize players if they miss the target, so if you miss, you lose a point. This will hopefully prevent players from just rapid firing. But with that, I think we finally have our final product. I had a ton of fun making this one. I've made Flappy Bird a bunch of times, but this one is probably my favorite. If you'd like to play, I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you guys as always for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.